I'm Rob Dawson. We've got Mark Ogden back in the studio, but we've lost James. James is in Eindhoven ahead of Arsenal's Champions League trip. James, Eindhoven treating you well so far?
Yeah, all good. Nice reminder of the realities of European travel these days on arrival here. Actually, we were in two queues for the passport control. One was EU passports, one was non-EU, and this British guy goes right up to the EU passport. Is told he's got to go to join the other queue, and the Dutch passport control officer just looked him right in the eyes when he said, "Well, why? I've just queued for 10 minutes to get here." And he said, "Because you voted for Brexit." And I was like, "Yeah, well, that's where we are." So
it's not as glamorous as you think, is it, all this football travel? We're going to start today then with Man United's finances. Mark, you've written a piece that's going up on ESPN.com this week about the importance of United's Europa League tie against Real Sociedad. I think in your intro, you've called it the most important game or the most impactful game potentially since 1990. You're going to have to explain that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously United have been to 4 Champions League finals since then. Won 2, lost 2. They've won countless Premier League titles, FA Cups. But for me, this is the most consequential game for United since Sir Alex Ferguson went to Nottingham Forest with his team in January 1990, needing to win to save his job. And people might think that's a bit over the top, bit of hyperbole, but the situation is if Man United don't win the Europa League this season, which gives them a route back into the Champions League, they are facing a shortfall of at least £100 million next season. And that's, at the moment, with the situation the club are in, considering their losses, their job cutting, their desperate need to strengthen the squad, to be £100 million down before they even start next season, that could put United back for 5 or 6 years. So that's why, for me, this game and every Europa League game which follows between now and the end of the season to the final in Bilbao is the most important game for 35 years. And if they don't win the Europa League, I mean, that is the only route to Europe now. They can't get into Europe via the FA Cup, they're knocked out. They can't get in via the league because they're so far adrift. So they have to win the Europa League, which has what is the golden ticket of a pass to the Champions League. So it's a real tightrope. And if they win it, amazing, that gets them. It's like snakes and ladders. It's the kind of ladder right back up to where they need to be, or close to. But if they don't win it, the reality is that United have got to rebuild the squad, change the club with a lot less money coming in.
I mean, United have been quite keen, haven't they, to kind of tell fans that they've lost 300 million over the last 3 years, that's impacted their PSR, that they're so close to breaching PSR that it's hampering what they can invest in players and the squad. It's obviously hampering what Ruben Amorim can do. He's only a couple of months into the job. I know it's a very complicated topic, but can you just assess that the scale of the problems at Man United for a casual listener maybe who doesn't understand what kind of financial mess United are in at the moment?
Yeah, first of all, let me just explain the breakdown of my £100 million black hole. So being in Europe is worth to United around about £50 million from just being in Europe. That's the Europa League. If they're in the Europa League, they can earn about £50 million. And that includes gate receipts, because every time United play at Old Trafford, it's worth £4 to £5 million in gate receipts. If they're in the Champions League with the way it's going now, you're looking at about £80 million basic that a club will earn. So £80 million down, 4 games, that's £20 million for the games. If they're not in the Champions League, then they're looking at another £20, £25 million drop on their earnings from Adidas. So already it's mounting to over £100 million. So even if they can't be in the Europa League now, but even if they were back in the Europa League, if they can account the Europa League money, it's still a massive hole. Add to the fact that every Premier League position is worth around £3.5 million. United are going to finish maybe 8, 9, 10 places below where they finished last season, which means they could be looking at a £30, £35 million shortfall there. So the situation they're in right now, we saw the Q2 or the quarterly figures recently. They were pretty bad. They highlighted a drop in revenue. And just to explain how important it is to be in Europe, Liverpool announced their losses or the annual figures last week, and their losses were £57 million. Now the bulk of that, the vast majority, was because they weren't in the Champions League last season. So it's a massive, massive revenue stream for the big clubs. And that's why a lot of these clubs, Arsenal reported losses recently. Liverpool reported losses. Aston Villa are operating at the moment with 96% of their wage bill of their turnover. So that is a huge financial commitment. But if you're in the Champions League, you're okay. If you're not in the Champions League, as United haven't been and probably won't be unless they win the Europa League, then they have to service a huge wage bill. And that's what they can't do.
I mean, just in terms of United are facing issues that other clubs aren't, particularly the Glazer debt, the leverage buyout from 2005, because I mentioned that £300 million that they've lost over the last 3 years. It's estimated that around 200 million of that is interest payments alone on Glazer debt. So it's obviously a problem that's only affects Man United. But in terms of what the Champions League and the Europa League and qualification can do for other clubs, James, I mean, you've seen that firsthand with Arsenal and Tottenham. You know, the importance of qualifying for those competitions, the extra revenue it generates, what happens then with in terms of what you can invest in the squad and maintaining that level in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think Arsenal are probably the most obvious comparison here in that, you know, they were Champions League mainstays for a number of years. I know that it's sort of the back end of the Wenger era. They started to budget in 4-year cycles, and they worked on the basis that 3 out of every 4 years they would be in the Champions League. So that's how they sort of controlled their spending, and they gave themselves a little bit of a safety net. But of course, the problem was they started to fail to qualify for the Champions League every year. It became 6 years. And, you know, a lot of that obviously coincided that period with COVID as well. I mean, it's easy to forget perhaps that, you know, Arsenal were one of the first clubs to lay off staff. I know there's obviously a lot of focus on Ineos and doing that now, but I mean, Arsenal, I think it was 55 non-playing staff they made redundant. They asked the players to take a 15% wage cut. The directors did the same. You know, and a lot of that was obviously the COVID impact was huge, but a lot of that was also because, of course, they didn't have the Champions League revenue and hadn't had it for a number of years, and could see, you know, financial fair play rules tightening, and you know, and the revenue streams sort of struggling to reach what they had before. So there is a real warning there for United that, you know, obviously what Arsenal were able to do. And it's why Mikel Arteta gets a kind of an easier ride than perhaps other managers would now, is that he was able to turn that situation around. You know, the bravery that they showed, that maybe Man United now need to show in paying off the players that they don't want to be there. You know, they paid off, I think it was 9, they ripped up 9 players' contracts, and they weren't cheap. You know, Mesut Ozil, I think, got something like 7 million quid out of the club to rip up his contract and get rid of him because they felt the culture of the club was wrong. You know, and they did that with a number of other players, Skodran Mustafi, Socrates, of course, Aubameyang, before he went to Barcelona. So that was a massive financial risk for Arsenal at the time, but they felt that they needed this reset to get the club right. And it just feels as though what Ineos are doing at the moment is targeting the easier wins, which is the non-playing staff, the people who don't have the profile, you know, the behind-the-scenes characters, rather than the main players who really have proven over a long period of time that they are not good enough. And if you're going to back Ruben Amorim, the best way to do that is to get rid of the players he doesn't want, and to do it quickly, because the longer that they're there, the more this situation is going to fester.
The problem with that, though, that United have got, is that they're so close to the ceiling on PSR that if they did that, so it was explained to me last week. So if you take Casemiro, for example, he's got a year left on his contract. So he was signed for Real Madrid 2022, I think, on a 4-year contract. So on the books, he's worth £15 million to United next season. So if United were to cancel Casemiro's contract to get off the wage bill, they would have a £15 million loss on their accounts because he's still worth £15 million. So what United have to do with Casemiro is try and find somebody that will pay at least £15 million to write off that loss. And so it's not a loss, it balances the books, and then get his wages off the bill. Now, who is going to pay £15 million for Casemiro as well as pay his wages? It's not going to happen. Marcus Rashford is another situation whereby, you know, again, United want Rashford out of the club, but he's on £325,000 a week with 3 more years left on that contract. There's a suggestion that he's worth around £40 million. That, you know, Aston Villa might pay that. Now, if you can sell Rashford at £40 million, that's pure profit on the books. But Marcus Rashford is not going to take a pay cut, I wouldn't have thought, to go to Aston Villa. Aston Villa can't afford to pay him twice what their top earners on. So United are either going to have to subsidise Marcus Rashford's move away by paying half of his wages or paying him to go. So again, there's no easy way out. So, you know, Arsenal maybe did that just before PSR started to bite, but I think United have now backed themselves into such a corner that they can't do it. And, you know, that's just 2 players. Mason Mount never plays. Luke Shaw never plays. They're on contracts that ideally the club would move them on because they're not earning those contracts. But it's, again, one, you've got to find people to take them on, and you've got to find people to take them on at the worth on the club's books, which is just unrealistic because, you know, the Casemiro one is the big one. Anthony's another one. You know, Anthony was signed for £85 million 3 years ago. Again, you know, you're looking at maybe £30 million on the books. Nobody's going to pay £30 million for Anthony. So United ideally would get rid of all these players, but they can't do it because they will just go straight into infringing PSR rules.
I mean, there are 3 main reasons, aren't there, really, why United are in this position. One is the Glazer debt, the amount of money it takes to service that debt, I think must have come out recently, said it takes around £3 million.
It's about £35 million a year.
£3 million a month or something to service that debt. Sorry. On top of that, you've got a net spend, which is over the last 10 years is comparable to the likes of Man City. But there have been so many poor decisions made that there has been no success from that money spent. I mean, I think in the last fiscal year alone, it's more than £200 million on players that were signed initially for Erik ten Hag, a man that you went and sacked 3 years ago. And then the performances on the pitch, that in the last sort of 10 years, I think they qualified for the Champions League, 6 times? In the last 10 years, they've won one Champions League knockout game, which is incredible for a team which, in the latter years of Sir Alex Ferguson, won it in 2008, reached the final in 2010, and 2009 and 2011. And the drop-off in terms of performance off the pitch, performance on the pitch, is so stark that you're almost seeing in front of your eyes a team that was at the very, very top of European football becoming a mid-table team, a perennial mid-table team.
Yeah, and just within that spend you talk about, United owe over £300 million on outstanding transfer payments. Now, I have to explain that is a big figure for United, obviously, but that is not unusual. Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, they all have big kind of payments to settle on players that they have signed over the years. Basically, if a player signs for a club on a 4-year contract, the payment is paid over the 4 years, so it's not unusual for what's happened with United. But the situation United is, other clubs have sold players and kind of balancing the book. Their net kind of outlay isn't as big as United, so they've got that problem to address. But, you're right, all these financial problems mount up. It's like United have been on a spending spree on a credit card, and they've bought all this useless stuff they don't need, all these kind of high-end items that are no use to anybody anymore. They can't get rid of them. And they've got to pay for it. 3 or 4 years down the line, they've got to pay for all these extravagant spending that they had 3 or 4 years ago. And unfortunately for Ruben Amorim, he's inheriting the lavish spending of the Ten Hag regime and even the Solskjaer regime. He's got to unpick all that. And, the question mark is, and I know we're going to address this, is he going to get to the point where he can do that? It feels like he's in a race right now with the players he wants to get rid of. Who's going to last the longest?
Before we do that then, James, I think sometimes me and Mark are obviously based in Manchester. We get caught up sometimes in the whirlwind that comes with Man United. You're a bit more removed from that. Do you still see Man United as a kind of major Premier League player? In the way that Arsenal have made themselves title challengers in the last few years, is the view outside Manchester that United are still one of the top teams, or is it the kind of looking at them as a team that have kind of slipped away and we don't have to worry about them anymore because they're so far adrift of everything?
I think that the most damning aspect is that, you talk to the clubs that I sort of primarily cover, being Arsenal, Chelsea and Tottenham, and those clubs, would fear a trip to Old Trafford. They don't anymore. They don't. They expect to win there. They expect to beat that team home and away now. Obviously the history, and probably the older you are, the more revered Manchester United are in your own mind. But there's a generation of fans now who are coming through who don't really remember the Fergie era particularly well. They only know the last decade that's been mismanagement on an unbelievable scale. And I think, there's reverence for the size of the club and the history and, and the size of the stadium and everything that comes with that. But I don't think there's anything like the sense of trepidation that there used to be for those teams when they go and play Man United. And I do think, I know we've talked a lot about Ineos, rightly, but the Glazers, my understanding, and you guys correct me on this, but I think the Glazers have taken £1 billion out of that club in total to service the debt. There is no way that football authorities, respectable, responsible football authorities, should allow that to happen. And there's a lot of talk in this country now about the independent regulator and the powers that regulator will have to control the buying and selling of football clubs going forward. I don't think they're going to ban leverage buyouts. It doesn't sound like that's something that's on the agenda, but it really should be. Because if I buy a house and I need a mortgage on that house, then I am means tested and I'm given a maximum limit I can borrow. It's the same if I want to buy a nice car, anything else. There is no way in this world that the Glazers should have been allowed to complete that takeover in the first place and borrow the amount of money that they have. Because there are only probably one or two clubs in the world that could have £1 billion taken out of them over 20 years and still be functioning. The fact, when you look at it in that context, that United are still standing is a testament to how big that club was before they took them over. And I know there's an argument about the Glazers have added commercial value and off the field, they've had their assets that have improved the size and the scale of the club over a period of time. But you cannot say to me that it can be acceptable. And the Premier League is the biggest league in the world. It should be more regulated than it is now, because you cannot allow a situation where owners who effectively do not have the money or do not want to put the money in to run a club effectively can be allowed to complete that takeover. It's just a warning for everybody that this should not be allowed to happen in future.
I mean, the point you make there about how a club can still function, that's right. And I think just to your point, Robert, are people still worried about Man United or scared? That the one positive I can bring out of this for fans is that people are still respectful of Man United or aware of what a club they are, because the recent Deloitte Money League was published in January, and Man United are fourth in terms of revenue generated. So despite all the problems they've got, only 3 clubs in the world make more money per year than Man United, and 2 of those are Man City and PSG. Now they have revenue streams that Man United and other clubs can't tap into. Real Madrid at the top, but Man United are the 4th biggest generating club in the world, despite all the terrible results and performances over the last 10 years. So that shows that if or when, they will get it right eventually, somebody will. When United get it right, they're a juggernaut, and they're a juggernaut that will take a lot of stopping, but the problem is with the juggernaut that's going the wrong way, it takes a lot of stopping as well. So that's where United are. They're a juggernaut going down a hill with no brakes at the moment, and it's a worry as to where it's going to stop. But if they get it right, this is a club that's got a massive fan base, it's got massive commercial appeal, it's got a great history. So all the positives are there. The negatives right now are the people that are running the club and the people that, are trying to exploit the club for what it is, and to, for the Glazers, as we know, it's like a cash machine. It has been for so many years because of the money they've taken out of it.
You've spoken there about the financial impact possibly of that Real Sociedad game. We'll move on to what it might mean for Ruben Amorim. Now, I spoke to people at United before the Fulham game, and they've been really, really keen to stress that they're very committed to Amorim. They're not going to make knee-jerk reactions. They know that it's not been great on the pitch, but he's only a couple of months in. Gradually, as it kind of approached that Fulham game, they were kind of accepting that the cup competitions this season were really important. A, because it prolongs the season, it gives United something to play for into sort of April and May, but also because it is a pathway into Europe. The FA Cup gets you into Europe. Obviously, winning the Europa League gets you into the Champions League. Obviously, now they've been knocked out of the FA Cup. Ruben Amorim is facing that game against Real Sociedad, probably the toughest tie that they could have got. They could have been given. What happens to Ruben Amorim, or what happens to the pressure around him if they don't win that tie and they get knocked out?
Well, the pressure, I'd imagine, will primarily come from us, the media. I think because that is the way it is. If Man United lose and the manager gets questions asked of him, so internally, I'm not hearing a lot of heat right now on Amorim, because it's, the decision was made by Ineos. It's their guy. So if they admit that they've made another mistake, having made the mistake with Dan Ashworth, it looks like they're incompetent, and so they don't really look like they're incompetent, even though they might be. The fans, generally, I think that the big majority are behind Amorim, because I think they see him doing what they want a manager to do, and in many ways, he's the one person at the club hasn't let them down yet. Yeah. The owners have let them down. Ineos have let them down. Certainly, judging by the chants towards Jim Ratcliffe at the weekend, that they're not a fan of Jim Ratcliffe, and the players have let them down repeatedly. So they see Amorim as basically being the first coach that's gone in there with a real idea of what he wants to do and how to do it. But the problem is, he's relying on players who aren't good enough, who know they haven't got a future there, to get him to the summer. And it's almost like a race between players who aren't good enough, who know that their time's up, and Amorim to see who can survive the longest. And it has to be Amorim, because if they get to the summer and the club decide that, there's no guarantee it's going to get better between now and the end of the season. You look at the fixture list, United might finish 15th, 16th. They might not climb the table. So by the time you get to the summer, you've got a manager who's so wedded to this formation to the point where it's becoming a problem for him now, because he's so stubborn with it. But if he went the other way, if he said, right, okay, we'll go to 4-3-3 or 4-4-2 and see how it goes, and they start winning some games, then how does he get his credibility back in the summer when he says, right, lads, I want to go back to 3 at the back now? Oh, it didn't work last season. So he's backed himself into a corner. If they get into that situation where Ineos thinking his system isn't working, the players aren't improving, do we really want to buy new players to fit his system and then risk 6 months' time having to sack him with a load of players that aren't suitable for the next manager? So,
and that's my concern, because if you make the decision to hire Amorim post-season, knowing full well he's going to come in and play 3-4-3. You have to see it out to the end of the season, and you have to get to the summer and back him wholeheartedly, because there's no point otherwise. The concern is that the start has been so poor, and you're right. I can't really see it picking up between now and the end of the season. Because if the players were going to get the system, they would have done it by now, and he hasn't got the players. He hasn't got the players. Just in attacking positions, he hasn't got the players, and the players he has got aren't good enough. So it's not going to pick up, I wouldn't have thought, between now and the end of the season. And then Ineos get caught in this kind of halfway house, whereas you get to the summer, you need to spend money on new players, but you're not 100% sure that Amrim is the guy.
Money they haven't got.
And you're not 100% sure Amrim is the guy. So you kind of say, well, we're not going to give you all the players you want, because we're not sure whether we're going to still be playing this system in 3 months. So we're going to give you a couple of club signings that you're going to have to work with, and a couple of your guys. And Amrim is sat there at the start of the season going, this isn't what I asked for. And he's still in the same mess as he was in sort of January and February. I mean, James, you've obviously seen from a distance the 3 months that Amrim has had. I know that Mark was on ESPN after the Fulham game saying that United have got worse. Is that an opinion that you would agree with? Have you seen anything in the last 3 months on the pitch to suggest that Ineos have got that managerial appointment right and Amrim is the right man to take United forward?
Look, I think it says a lot about just the state of the world these days, actually, that, he talks a good game, and that actually can take you an awfully long way, He comes across as likeable. I think he's maybe almost too honest in some of his press conferences. He's got a charm about him. I think if I was a player, I'd want to play for him. I can see that, It's hard. I mean, on the pitch, I remember when they played at Spurs, you could see the patterns. You could see what they were trying to do. Mazraoui was coming in off the right. They were trying to find him in that little pocket, that sort of 10 pocket. And then he was switching play to the left wing, and then the left wing was trying to deliver it into the box. They tried that pattern of play about 3 or 4 times. A couple of times it came off. And you could sort of say, okay, I can see the patterns now. I can start to see what they're trying to do. But they're flashes, aren't they, guys? I mean, they're moments in games. They're not a club. They're not a team that you watch and you think they're really exerting sustained pressure on anyone, apart from perhaps when they just go for broke near the end of games or they're trying to gamble. But they don't ever have control of matches. And that, I think, is a problem. And people talk a lot about this system. Has anybody watched Crystal Palace recently? That's how to play 3-4-2-1. That's exactly what Glasner's doing at Crystal Palace, and they look really good. And people talk about, players who maybe are not suited to the system. Mateta playing up front in that system, Eze, Ismail Sarr. I mean, they all have potential in those roles, but they've proven adaptable. And yet, I'm not suggesting that Glasner's a better manager than Amrim. I'm just simply saying that what he's done with a much more modest squad and obviously a smaller budget is to sort of say, well, I'm going to take this group and I'm going to change them to 3 at the back and I'm going to show how they can do it.
Those players individually you mentioned are probably better than what United have got. You know what I mean? Crystal Palace have probably got a better squad right now than Man United.
Yeah. I mean, one other thing I wanted to ask, actually, because just from talking about this from afar, is about the stadium. And I know we've sort of covered this, but these feasibility reports, they obviously take time, and it's not an easy decision to decide whether you're going to spend £1 billion on the stadium. But the financial picture that you're talking about, Mark, I mean, is this the real reason why this stadium decision is taking place at the end of the season? Because it is simply a case of, we don't really know how we're going to pay for this. And if we're not in any European competition, if the 100 million black hole suddenly materialises, is that the difference between a new stadium and a rebuild, or, a rebuild or a new stadium and nothing?
I'm not sure it's connected, to be honest. I don't think they join the dots on that. I think that they really want somebody to help pay for the stadium. They look at Man City and West Ham having had basically free stadiums, or I think they're both kind of, peppercorn rent is the phrase, isn't it? It costs them nothing. They're owned by the taxpayer. And you look at Tottenham and Arsenal and Everton to a lesser extent, the cost that it's involved building those new stadiums. Arsenal are still probably paying for it, really, 20 years on. Tottenham will be paying for a while, Everton will be paying for a while. So they don't want to be in a situation where they've got all the debt off, the football debt, which relates to the Glazers, and more debt. So I think they're trying to do it on a kind of a dual track, but I don't see how it works. And I think they have to convince people they can get it right in a football sense first, that they know what they're doing before somebody will put some money to invest in a stadium. But a stadium is an opportunity to some people. It's, the money they can make from a stadium, if they can do it properly, it is an opportunity for somebody to invest in. But if that's going to be the case, they might have to look at, the Glazers or Ineos selling more to private equity to get more money in, because I don't see any other way out of it.
Just to wrap up then, there are a lot of United fans who will listen to this and be very worried about United's future. They've already kind of made their mind up that there isn't much optimism around the club at the moment. If you were to look into your crystal ball, what does United's year look like? How bad could it get?
How bad could it get? It's pretty bad right now, isn't it? They're going to finish the lowest league position. Apparently, they're on course to be the lowest league position since they were relegated in 1974. This is lower than anything Fergie had in his bad days. They're out of the Cups. The Europa League is still possible, but I don't see them getting past Sociedad or Tottenham or other clubs that are in there. I think that's... So, it looks really, really grim. I think Amorim will survive, but I think he's going to survive limping on, because I don't, like you said before, Rob, I don't think they're going to give him the players that he wants and needs. And even if they had all the will in the world to give him the players that he wants, they haven't got the money to do it unless they win the Europa League, to get in the Champions League. But that's kind of fantasy land, isn't it?
Well, Ineos will hope not. Well, United aren't the only ones in Europa League action this week. Tottenham Hotspur are playing AZ Alkmaar in their last 16 tie as well. It's been a difficult season for Ange Postecoglou and Spurs, although Archie Gray has been one of their shining lights. James was able to speak to him at the London Football Awards.
The next station is Wembley Park. Exit for Wembley Stadium and Wembley Arena.
He is going to be an absolute superstar for club and country. The winner is Archie Gray.
Archie, congratulations. In the manager's press conferences, he's talked a lot about the load that a lot of players have been through in the last couple of months. I was looking at the fixtures, and you've started 19 in the last 20 games. So I guess the first question is, how are you?
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm an 18-year-old, so know my body. I definitely know that I'm all right. And to be fair, the last few games we've had a bit of a gap between them all. So I think we're all well rested, and especially going into the next game, we'll all definitely be all right. We'll have a good week of training, and we'll all be ready for that. So yeah.
But during that intense period, the manager told us in the press conferences that the training sessions, you basically were walking through the sessions because you just had no time to do any of the physical stuff. What was that like to sort of be a part of? Because presumably that's not normal.
Yeah, well, playing in the Championship last year, that's pretty much all that we did. So I was pretty used to it. Do you know what I mean? Because of the amount of games that we had, we didn't really have the chance to, get the sessions on the pitch and the load that we would at the start of the season and in pre-season and stuff like that. But we got all the tactical work, and like I said, it was a difficult period having that many games. But I feel like we're getting on to the the more positive side of it, and hopefully we can bring that form forward. So yeah.
I've heard you talk about Sonny in other interviews about the sort of role model that he's been for you. Can you just sort of give us a couple of examples of maybe things he's done, or, off the field, or how he's helped you settle in, some sort of specifics?
Yeah, definitely. He's probably, he's definitely a world-class player, and as a person, he's probably one of the nicest guys that I've ever met. And, ever since I first moved to the club, he always sat down and had breakfast with me and stuff like that every morning, which for, a new player at the club, you look at players like Sonny, Madders, all of them in the squad, to be fair, and you wouldn't really expect them to go out of their way and, speak to the new 18-year-old who's just come from a Championship club. And, to be fair to them, they helped me settle in really well, and everyone's been amazing with me. So yeah.
I know you're asked a lot about positions all the time, playing as centre-back. Of all the sort of experiences you've had so far, where did playing against Erling Haaland rank the other night?
Yeah, I don't need to say how good he is. It's obviously never an easy game against players like that. In the Prem, there's so many good players. Like even the week before, Liam Delap for Ipswich. He's an absolute handful, and I've said that before. He's a tough player to play against. But Haaland, I don't need to say how good he is. He's obviously, for me, who's not a centre back who's playing there. It was a difficult night, but I thought in the second half we created a lot of chances, and we could have got a draw or whatever out of it. But they got the win, so fair play to them, and they're obviously a world class team. So yeah.
I know you've only been at the club a few months, obviously, but there's always a lot of talk around Tottenham about not having won a trophy since 2008. Is that, how sort of aware are you of that? Is it something the players speak of, and a particular motivation with obviously the Europa League coming up?
No, it's not something that we speak of, because we know that the opportunity that we've got is golden, and especially in the Europa League with the squad that we've got and the people that are coming back from injuries, we know we can change that, and we're just focusing on the next game and not getting too carried away. So yeah.
Because obviously been a difficult period, but the season could still end on a real high, because that Europa League must be a clear target for you now. I know there's a lot of games to go in last 16 stage, but it must be the target, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely the goal, but like I said, we're just not getting carried away. We're not looking too far ahead. Obviously, it's the Europa League next game, but we're just taking each game at a time, and like I said, not looking too far ahead. So yeah.
So James, we just heard a little bit of your interview with Archie Gray at the London Football Awards. I know you like him because obviously you were on the judging panel that picked him as the winner of the Young Player of the Year. But just how good has he been in his first year from after his move from Leeds United?
Yeah, I mean, very, very impressive, and I think. His is a very unusual story in the sense that he's obviously been brought in for a considerable amount of money, depending on who you talk to, up to about 30 million, plus Joe Rodon went the other way. And obviously he was bought as a central midfielder, and he's kind of come in and although he's played fullback for Leeds in the previous season, he's never played centre-back. And suddenly, not only is he sort of filling in there for a game, I mean, he started 19 of the last 20 Spurs games, at centre-back. So it's been quite remarkable, especially considering all the change that's been going on around him, all the turbulence around the club. You've got the uncertainty over the manager, the protests against the ownership. And sort of in the middle of all that, you've got two teenagers, Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall, who've sort of come in and have shown this sort of maturity and composure beyond their years to do their job to the best of their ability in a way that really, seems to be very encouraging for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I made the mistake during the Liverpool second leg of the semi-final of the Carabao Cup of suggesting that Archie Gray was the only kind of shining light in that performance, and that at some point soon he will move to a bigger club than Tottenham. And obviously you can imagine the response was, A, is it a big club already, and B, he's been rubbish, what are you saying that for? So I thought it was really good against Liverpool in a really difficult situation, but I think generally his versatility, his level-headedness, he's a real talent, and the reality is that if Tottenham don't progress, then they might have to think about, fight hard to keep him, because he's got real talent, he's got real prospects, isn't he?
Well, I mean, look, Spurs obviously are a club who have a philosophy where they try to buy these young players and they, develop them, and then if they outgrow the club, then Daniel Levy waits until the final moment of the final day of the window, and then he eventually sells them at a premium. That's a business model that's maybe not served the team on the pitch very well, but it certainly served them well as a business. I mean, I think for the time being, Archie Gray couldn't have done much more in terms of how he's adapted and, shown his aptitude for the top level. I mean, one of the things I mentioned to him in the interview is sort of, Ange Postecoglou was kind of trying to be explaining on almost a 3 times a week basis for the last 3 months that, look, we don't have any time to train. We're walking through these sessions. I can't work with these players. And I sort of said to Archie Gray, well, what's that been like? Because not only are you trying to acclimatise to a new club, but you're not really having time to bed in and learn your teammates and the way that they play. And he just said, well, I played 50 odd games for Leeds last season, and in the Championship, that's what it's like, and I think in a weird way, that's kind of helped him to already understand that environment, to get into that sort of, play, recover, one day train, play, recover, one day train, that sort of mentality, that kind of rhythm has probably helped him, if anything, to just to sort of show his best on a regular basis.
When you spoke to me, again, he comes across, mature beyond his years. Do you think that's the reality of his kind of family heritage? I mean, obviously, his dad played for Leeds, his granddad played for Leeds, his uncle was one of Leeds' greatest ever players, Eddie Gray. He seems to have that kind of that football mentality. I mean, he just looks a natural both on and off the pitch.
Yeah, he does, and yeah, I think that's right. I think he's obviously, as you say, he's got the heritage, but he's got good people around him. I mean, on the night, so the London Football Awards were at Wembley Stadium for the first time. It's different. I mean, I'm slightly biased because, as Rob said, I am on the panel, but it's slightly different to a lot of other awards events in that there are some fans in the room. Some of it's corporate, some of it is the players and the club staff of the various London clubs all in attendance. So it's kind of there's a bit of a party mix to it. It's a bit more looser than it's sort of straight-laced, more formal award ceremonies that you might be accustomed to. And he was very comfortable in that environment. He was happy to pose for selfies and sign autographs. And, there's sort of quite a bit of media responsibility that comes with winning one of those awards. And he took to all that absolutely fine, sort of switching between, more sort of serious questions to sort of questions about where he goes out in London and his favourite restaurants and coffee shops and those kind of things. So for an 18-year-old to be able to deal with all that and take it in his stride, just sort of is a testament to his character.
He's only sort of halfway through his second full season as a professional. You mentioned there that he played a lot of games for Leeds in the Championship last season, more than 50. I think he's played 35 already for Spurs. When you look at him, where do you see his ceiling going forward? And obviously there's going to be an England squad announcement in the not too distant future. Are we talking about Archie Gray as being an England international now, or is that too soon, do you think?
Well, I don't think he'll be an England international as a centre-back. I mean, the plan remains for him to play in central midfield. I mean, obviously it's never helpful when coaches make these comparisons, but one of his really young coaches, I think he was 12 or 13, sort of compared him to Zinedine Zidane in his style of play, which is something that is that's kind of stuck with him a little bit. And he does get asked it in interviews times about that Zidane comparison. But actually, again, sort of weirdly, because he's been playing as centre-back, no one's even thought about that because obviously Zidane didn't play there. So, I think that's helped him. It's whether he can then step into midfield on a more consistent basis and start trying to dictate games and start trying to influence games in the Premier League that will sort of really find out what his ceiling is. I mean, England obviously are not blessed with a lot of great centre-backs. We sort of look at that habitually as a little bit of a weak area for England, but I'd sort of be surprised if, given the kind of general short-term nature of what the Thomas Tuchel era is likely to be, which is he's here for 18 months and he's going to try and win a World Cup and all bets are off after that, I'd be surprised if he entrusted that responsibility to an 18-year-old. But it's not impossible, given how he's been this season, that he could throw him into a squad, take a look at him and go from there.
Just for the benefit of our Scottish listeners, can you explain how England have managed to get Archie Gray from Scotland? Because obviously he was born in England, but his dad, let's say, played for Scotland, his granddad played for Scotland, his uncle played for Scotland. And is there any risk that Scotland could yet take him away? Because I know that England have been very keen to get players that have got, dual nationality at times, but Archie Gray is Scottish football royalty in the sense of his parents and his grandparents. So is there a risk he might go to Scotland, or do you think the England FA have got him signed and sealed?
I mean, I know that. I mean, he's played for England at I think 4 or 5 different age groups.
I'm under 15 upward, yeah.
Yeah, so he's well embedded in that St George's Park system. So I'd be surprised if they let him go. I mean, I suppose, look, if you're being a cynic about it, and England have kind of done this in the past, is that they may cap him to just kind of avoid that, kick that can down the road and sort of take that off the table immediately. So I suppose that's a possibility. But again, if Gareth Southgate had been in charge, he'd probably be thinking in those terms. But all the sort of early noises I get about Thomas Tuchel are that he's here for 18 months and he is focused from day one on trying to win that World Cup. Look, who knows? We could be sitting here in a year's time and thinking Archie Gray is one of the key players. I can't really see it.
And that's the risk, isn't it? That's the risk because obviously, like you say, if Tuchel's only focused on the here and now, Scotland may qualify for the World Cup. They're doing well under Steve Clarke. I guess that the point comes whereby, Scott McTominay had a similar choice to make. He was born and bred in Lancaster, Scottish parents, he chose Scotland. Archie Gray, like you say, he's been through the English system. But if Scotland progress to a World Cup and Archie Gray's thinking, well, how long will I have to wait for England? Will I get a regular England squad? I guess the question is still there to be answered.
Yeah, it is. No, okay, absolutely it is. But, this sort of feeds into a wider debate about, well, what do people want from their England manager? The criticism about Southgate was that he sort of thought about these kind of things too much. And he was sort of, why is he not thinking more about the here and now and short-termism and getting teams over the line and just focused on winning the World Cup and winning the European Championships? You can't kind of have it both ways, really. I suspect that the FA will be alive to this situation, obviously. And I'm sure that Thomas Tuchel will be made aware of it. Now, I suppose the other thing to say is that the relatively easy nature of England's World Cup qualifying group means that finding a spot for him at some point to take this off the table then becomes a decision that the player will have to make. Does he feel well, actually, this is a bit of a token effort from England to kind of get me, tie me down to the system. And actually, I could go and play a more active role for Scotland. I don't know where he stands on that, if I'm honest, but I sort of suspect that those conversations, as they always are with England and the FA, are going on internally about making sure they don't lose top talent. Because, of course, they've done it in the past with, various players that, Gareth Southgate, I know, has spoken about on record as ruining the loss of.
James has mentioned there about England losing top talents. I'm going to take you back to what you tweeted during that Liverpool game. Archie Gray's 18.
Yeah.
Is he at Spurs in 10 years' time, do you think?
No. 2-3 years max. If he continues his progression right now, I think he will be on the radars of Liverpool, Man City. That Spurs are a big club, but they're not a super big club that wins trophies. And we know that. I mean, this is the perennial debate about Tottenham. He said in that piece to you, James, that this is a golden opportunity to win a trophy. Well, 2008 was the last one. So if you're a big player at Tottenham, you want to win trophies. And if they're not winning trophies, then if Archie Gray continues to progress, he'll go to a bigger club that wins trophies.
It's difficult though, isn't it? Because you said before we started recording, he can't go to Man United because of his Leeds background. Can't go to Arsenal.
Does he think he want to go to Man United anytime soon?
No. But where does he go? If he can't go to United, he can't go to Arsenal. Where does he go?
Liverpool, Man City. They're the two top clubs in the country right now that have been Champions League winners recently. They're the big two for me. That if you're a footballer right now, you want to sign for one of those two teams. I think we're getting ahead of the game a bit with Archie Gray because he's still only 18. Yeah. But I do think that he does have that potential. And yeah, I mean, from what I've seen him so far, he can definitely develop into a player. He's a sort of player that Pep Guardiola would love to develop. He's versatile. He can play in the centre of the defence, centre of midfield. He's definitely got that ability to go to the next level. So, Spurs have got it all to do. Spurs might have to live up to Archie Gray's ambitions.
James, give the Spurs fans some reason for optimism. He's 28 years old. Where's he playing?
He's playing at a Tottenham team that's in the Champions League. Thriving under Ange Postecoglou, who's just signed a new deal to take him through to 2040. I don't know.
It was another flight to Ireland.
Yeah,
I've got a lot of sleep today.
He doesn't. From what I know of him, he doesn't strike. He's very ambitious. He doesn't strike me as a kid who's going to compromise his integrity and try and fast track his own ambition, sort of accelerate that beyond where his talent currently is. So, worth remembering, the Spurs stole him in at the last minute, really, from Brentford. Brentford thought they got that deal over the line. They put all the work in, and then Spurs sort of gazumped them right at the end. That sort of suggests that he was thinking, well, that's the kind of step I feel I need to make. That's where I am. And then obviously Spurs came in, which is a bigger club, with all respect to Brentford, not necessarily with Spurs as they are at the moment, not rivaling Liverpool and Man City in the last few years. So maybe he feels as though he needs to establish himself at that level for a few years, and then he might think about it. So I don't think. I mean, he's only just broken into the team. Do we have to talk about him leaving Spurs altogether so soon? I think we spent the whole of this period talking about how he's going to leave Tottenham. I think he's got a long way to develop at Spurs.
He's going to leave Tottenham and play for Scotland. There you go.
I think the other thing as well is that so he's leaving Spurs and he's playing for Scotland. So other than that, well done, Archie.
All eyes then on Archie Gray and his future. When we come back after the break, we'll be talking to Alex Kirkland in Madrid and a situation with Real Madrid and the refs in La Liga. We're recording this on Monday, so by the time you're hearing or listening to this, Real Madrid will have played Atletico in the Champions League. Now, Carlo Ancelotti says that he loves Champions League refs, but there isn't a lot of love for refs in La Liga. We're joined by Alex Kirkland, who's our man in Madrid. Now, Alex, can you just give us a little rundown of what the issue is between Real Madrid and the referees in Spain?
Yeah, Carlo loves Champions League refs, and Florentino Perez reportedly wants to bring English refs to Spain, which gives you an idea of where we're at.
He must be mad.
I guess it's hard from the outside, I know, to understand sort of where this comes from, because you think Real Madrid, biggest club in the world, most successful club, win trophies all the time. So where does this kind of paranoia and this kind of they're all out to get us kind of conspiracy type thinking come from, in particular with regards to referees? But there is some background here, and there are some reasons as well for Real Madrid to be unhappy. It's not paranoia if they are, out to get you. And of course, the context to all of this, with what's going on with refs and Real Madrid in Spain, is the Negreira case, which is an ongoing legal case here. It hasn't reached its conclusion yet, but there are some facts that are not disputed. And what those facts are is that for a number of years, Barcelona were making payments to a former referee who was then the vice president of Spain's refereeing committee. That fact is not disputed. Now, what those payments were being made for, what the outcome was, what the consequences were, all of that is still up for debate, and that process is ongoing. But that's kind of the background that conditions everything in terms of Real Madrid and referees. In terms of what's been going on for the last few weeks and months, there was basically a run of games where Madrid were really unhappy with specific key decisions in big games. There's 3 games in a row. They played Espanyol, Atletico, and Osasuna. The big one really was the Espanyol game. Inexplicable decision. The defender basically took out Mbappe from behind when he was through on goal, wasn't sent off. It was baffling, especially with VAR. No one could really understand it, but it happened. That was such a kind of clear, I guess, and manifest error that Madrid sent a letter, like a formal letter to the federation, using some really, really strong language, talking about the league being manipulated, adulterated, calling for kind of complete reform of the system, which they have done for a long time anyway. That was then followed by 2 more games, like I say, against Atletico and against Osasuna. Osasuna was the one where Bellingham was sent off for swearing at the referee. So it was sort of one game after another, and it just built and built and built. Since then, we've had a couple of weeks without so much controversy, which I've got to say, like from our point of view here, it's quite refreshing. It's quite nice to get a breather from it all, because it is a bit relentless at times, this refereeing talk around Madrid. But those are sort of the specific instances we've had lately, and a bit of the context as well. But it's very, very serious. You only have to, if you ever tune into Real Madrid's club TV channel before or after games, all the talk is about the refs. Not just after the game in terms of analysing decisions, but before the game as well, kind of highlighting that referee's record in previous games against Madrid, errors that might have been made. It kind of conditions everything. It's quite remarkable. And like I say, Madrid have gone as far as to call for sort of root and branch reform of the system. We may get some changes to come in the summer. There's talk of changes at the refereeing committee in terms of the president, in terms of the guy that runs the VAR. So some of those changes are going to come, we think. But will there be enough to satisfy Florentino and Real Madrid? Probably not.
Alex, just on that, I was in Madrid the midweek after Bellingham was sent off, and we asked Pep Guardiola about it, and Pep was basically saying, leave the referee alone. It was a slightly disconnected situation because the referee at the time was being investigated for something else, but it was all part of the whole Bellingham thing. And I'm just wondering whether the Bellingham situation kind of puts it all in, it crystallises it all, because, I mean, maybe you have being based in Spain, you have a different perspective, but, the difference between an expletive followed by you or followed by off, to me, seems like, I can't see the shades of grey there. If you're saying that to a referee, you should be sent off. So what was Madrid's argument there? I know what their argument was, but what was it based in?
Yeah, you're right. Whether it was a you or an off was a bit of a misdirect, wasn't it? It was looking to shift the focus a bit. I think really the key was he insulting the referee or not? Now, Bellingham's argument, Madrid's argument, was that he wasn't talking to the referee when he said those words. It was more an expression of kind of frustration, kind of cast aside, rather than saying it directly to the referee. And in fairness, when you watch the footage, that seemed like an accurate reflection, although we should say that Bellingham's suspension in LaLiga was upheld. It wasn't overturned because the committee found that there wasn't conclusive evidence to back up his case and Real Madrid's case. I think there was also a feeling there in terms of that specific incident with Bellingham swearing, was there'd been 1 or 2 previous cases of this where Bellingham had been caught on camera swearing at the linesman or at the referee. And there was a bit of a feeling that maybe someone somewhere down the line had sort of said, okay, if this happens again, we're going to try and stamp this out. There is also a bit of a feeling that Real Madrid, I mentioned that kind of formal complaint, that letter they sent, that maybe that has backfired in a way. Because since then, like I say, the 2 games that sort of followed that, there were some high profile decisions that went against them. Now, is that coincidence? Maybe. Is there an element of refs thinking, well, hang on, we're not going to... It's hard to say. It's very, very difficult to say. But there's no doubt that every single game now is absolutely conditioned by all of this. And that goes into the analysis of every single decision that's made by the refs.
Alex, I mean, in the Premier League, the PGMOL have made sort of a concerted effort to improve the dialogue between themselves and the clubs. And they used to go in just once a season in pre-season and say, these are the kind of rule tweaks this year and, see it on the road type thing. But there are now regular meetings between the clubs after matches. And there is a sort of constant dialogue that they are trying to improve the decision-making and the understanding. Is there something similar in Spain? Are those conversations being had? Because it's sort of, from the public statements, it feels very us and them.
Yeah, there has been a move in recent years for greater transparency, I think, from refs in Spain. We hear from them more in the media. They give the occasional interview. We see more behind-the-scenes stuff. After Real Madrid's complaint, a couple of executives were invited down to the federation headquarters to listen to the audio of the recordings of the conversations between the ref and the VAR around the Mbappe incident, for example. They did that privately. I'm not sure how much it helped, but they were allowed to do that. I mean, you mentioned England as an example. I mean, of course, here, I sort of jokingly mention what the Federation President Luzan alleges that Florentino Perez said to him once about wanting to bring in English refs to Spain. England is often cited as a potential model to follow here, because here the referees are basically part of the federation's jurisdiction. You've got the federation here in Spain and you've got LaLiga. LaLiga run the top two divisions, the federation run everything else, and the referees are basically report to the federation. And there is a move to look at England and say, we need a fully independent body for the referees. And that's one of the reforms I think that Real Madrid would like to see brought in.
Alex, I'm just looking at the fixture list. So obviously right now it's a very tight La Liga race. And May the 11th, you've got Barca Real Madrid in Barcelona. Do you think there's any possible prospect of a non-Spanish referee? Because I can imagine the pressure that the referee would be under for that game. I think we know it's not going to happen, but how much pressure are referees for the Clásico under? Because that could be the title decider with all this nonsense going on behind the scenes. You could see why it would help to have a non-Spanish referee, just like in the old firm games where the Scottish referees are often targeted as well.
They did it in Turkey, didn't they? They had a Slovenian come in to do Galatasaray Fenerbahce, so it's not unheard of.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary, the pressure. You mentioned earlier the referee who was involved in the Bellingham sending off. A story broke a couple of days later, not coincidentally, that he was being investigated for some of his business activities. An inquiry was conducted. The federation cleared him of any wrongdoing. But that's another illustration of sort of the growing pressure that referees are under in every aspect of their lives. Now, of course, it's not going to happen for that game. But I mean, there's some people have alleged that what Madrid would like to see is them having a greater say in which referees get to referee their games. At the moment, it's sort of a 3-man panel that decides who refs each game.
Perez.
There's a La Liga representative, a federation representative, and a neutral representative, and that panel picks the refs for each game. But it's hard to see what, like I say, reforms are expected, changes are expected in the refereeing establishment here over the summer. But it's difficult to see whether they would ever reach the sort of extent that Real Madrid would like to see, that they would be happy with. You're right, as you said in the intro. They always point to the Champions League and European referees as doing things differently. There is a feeling that Spanish referees maybe aren't always the best communicators. Have a more sort of a standoffish approach. A slightly more old school. Sort of David Ellery style approach as a referee, and aren't as willing to sort of converse with players and engage in dialogue with players. And those are some of the sort of things that could change. But no, any big game, I mean, every game there's this discussion and this pressure, but certainly for the bigger games, for the derbies and for the Clásico, it reaches fever pitch, because you're getting to the point where, with almost every single referee, there's always a previous game, a previous incident, a previous controversy that you can point to. So like I say, if there were a sort of an approved list of referees, it's a list that's kind of getting shorter all the time.
Do you think, though, as you mentioned at the start, the Barcelona situation that's still ongoing, is this what it's all about? Is just Real just trying to keep the issue of referees in the public domain because Barcelona can't really have a go back?
I mean, I think it's definitely the background to all of this. And it's easy this has been going on now for years now, that Negreira investigation, since that story first broke. Of course, the pace of justice here in Spain moves extremely slowly.
Alex, just before you, what timescale does that relate to, that case?
Well, it was over a decade. It was from the early 2000s until I think around about 10 years ago, something like that. It was a long period of time, over a decade, that those payments were being made. And like I say, we shouldn't, just because it's been dragged on and we haven't got an outcome, we shouldn't underestimate how serious that is. And like I say, that's a really big deal. Whatever the conclusions are, whatever the effect was, even from what we know, even from what isn't disputed, it's very, very serious. And that is reason for Madrid, like I say, to rightfully, be kind of suspicious when it comes to all of this. So there's no doubt that's in the background. What's interesting, of course, is that Real Madrid and Barcelona are also partners. They're partners when it comes to the Super League and everything else. So you've got this Negreira case, which is a massive wedge between the two clubs, but Madrid haven't always attacked Barcelona as much as you might expect on that issue and on other issues, because in other matters, like the Super League, the two go hand in hand.
Do Atleti have a position on this? Because obviously we know that Simeone's team can be quite volatile and have their own issues. Have they got a view on this, or are they kind of taking a kind of a diplomatic stance away from it all?
Basically, all the other La Liga clubs have come out really quite strongly against Real Madrid in terms of this campaign against referees. And Atletico on social media, on Twitter, They've been posting about this quite regularly. They posted about it ahead of the derby in the league, basically making fun of Real Madrid for what they said was trying to sort of stir things up, trying to influence officials before the game. Atleti have really led the calls from other clubs to say, look, this is not okay. In fact, they kind of led a campaign of trying to say, let's show referees more respect. That's something the federation did as well last weekend. They had sort of players and referees posing in front of a kind of a slogan of respect for referees, respect for football last weekend. So Atleti have been one of sort of the leaders of that, as has pretty much every other club. They're not happy with this pressure that Real Madrid are putting on. I should say that campaign, that respect for referees campaign, is one that was met by whistles at the Bernabeu when it happened before the Real Madrid game last weekend as well.
One of you two must have a good referee story. James, you followed Arsene Wenger for ages. Oggy, you were covering Sir Alex Ferguson. One of you must have a good referee story.
I'm not going to answer that. I'm just going to take it back slightly to that. That really disappoints me that's how that respect campaign was greeted, because I do think we have a responsibility to protect the integrity of officials. You talk to most fans, well, maybe don't talk to them, but on social media, it seems like every single club's set of fans think there's an agenda from the referees against their own club. And it's a really dangerous sort of state of affairs that we've allowed clubs to publish statements questioning. I mean, I remember Liverpool did it. I mean, when they got that really bad VAR decision, it was obviously a really bad VAR decision against Tottenham, inexplicable mistake. And they released a statement questioning the sporting integrity of PGMOL. And that is a dangerous place for us to be in, as a game. We have to accept that these referees, I think the standard isn't good enough. I can't speak for LaLiga because I don't watch it enough, but in the Premier League, it's got worse, definitely, and something needs to be done about that. But to sort of put the idea out there and then propagate that idea that, actually, there might be an agenda against a certain club or that referees are trying to influence the outcome is just ridiculous. And, I think we've got to make sure that whatever the failings, that there is a respect level maintained for PGMOL and for all refereeing bodies, whatever league they operate in. And sorry, I know, Rob, you wanted a really light-hearted answer to finish the section, and I'll take it quite seriously. But it just really winds me up, this.
It's so much riding on it, and referees have always and will always be an easy target for managers to deflect away from the inadequacies of their team, for players, to cover up mistakes. Referees have never had a way of answering back, and I know lots of fans would like to see referees come out and speak in the media and stuff to talk about decisions. It's obviously never going to happen. But you talk about like a respect campaign. There's so much riding on all these games and matches that the referees are always going to be an easy target for criticism and suggestions of bias one way or the other. It's just an easy thing for clubs and managers and fans to pick at.
Yeah, and look, criticism is fine. It's part of the game. It's completely fair enough. And as I say, the standard of refereeing, particularly in the Premier League, is not good enough at the moment. It needs to be better. I'm not arguing any of that. But when we start questioning the integrity of these people and suggesting that there's some sort of conspiracy to predetermine the outcome or influence the outcome of matches or who wins the title or where these trophies are going, it is just absolutely ridiculous for anyone who wants to be taken seriously to suggest that is going on. And I just sort of refute any idea that we should even entertain that as a topic. Really, it's foolish. It's outlandish. It's incompetence that we're seeing. It's not corruption.
So you want me to lower the tone now, don't you?
I do. I want a story, a referee story.
Yeah, James is taking the moral high ground. I will lower the tone. So, no, I mean, you talk about Fergie. I mean, obviously, there's so many Fergie instances. The one that stands out is the Real Madrid game back in 2013. That was his last Champions League game when Nani was sent off for a high flick of the boot by a Turkish referee, and Fergie was so angry that he wouldn't speak to the media after the game. And we all know why now, because that was his last ever chance to win the Champions League. We didn't know at the time. But no, the one that stands out for me is when Ferguson accused Alan Wiley of not being fit to referee. He basically accused him of being overweight. Yeah. And the referees really fought back. I mean, I was covering that story on a day-to-day basis at the time, and it was the referees had their own union, and obviously the union fought back really hard, and they had a media guy or a spokesman who just really went after Fergie. And obviously Fergie, being a union guy from his days back in the shipyards in Glasgow, couldn't really fight back, and it got to the point where Ferguson had he actually issued an apology to Alan Wiley. He said that, you know, he apologised for questioning his fitness and things. So that was a real win for the referees. But there were plenty of times with Fergie.
Well, the one that stands, there was Martin O'Neill still tells a story about, I think it was a 2010 Carling Cup final, where in the first minute at Wembley, his Aston Villa team, I think Gabion Boglehor goes straight through on goal. He's brought down by Nemanja Vidic. It's a stonewall penalty. And the entire Villa bench are expecting Vidic to get sent off, and it doesn't happen. And Martin O'Neill is convinced that Phil Dowd, who was a referee that day, didn't send Vidic off because Sir Alex Ferguson was stood on the touchline, and he knew that he was going to get an absolute earful if he sent Vidic off in the first 5 minutes of a cup final, and decided to award the penalty and leave Vidic on. And obviously Man United went on and won 2-1.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Real are a huge club in Spain. I can imagine that the pressure referees must be huge when they referee a Real Madrid game, because they know that any decision they make is magnified. And it was the same with Fergie when he was as United manager. And there were so many instances where you knew that a referee maybe had second thoughts, because Ferguson would use that against the referee. And I mean, I went to so many Champions League press conferences with Ferguson, and his phrase would always be, if they're playing Real or Barcelona or a big Italian club, it would always, every game, we need a strong referee. The referee has to be strong. And he was basically putting into the referee's mind that I'm watching you.
Yeah.
And you know, James is right. That is unfair pressure. That is going beyond kind of. Ferguson wasn't accusing referees of bias, but he was making the point that I'm watching you, and the pressure that must put on them. The biggest manager in the world at the time, it's huge, you know, and it must affect their decision making. So it is the hardest job in football, being a referee, because nobody agrees with anything you do.
Just one final one then for you, Alex. How do you see this playing out? I mean, is this a situation that will disappear when, you know, Real Madrid start winning consistently and getting decisions in their favour, or is there a concerted effort, do you think, in Spain to improve the quality of referees, and there's going to kind of be a groundswell of support for it?
Well, it comes back up every time there's a controversial decision, doesn't it? But like I say, there is sort of change potentially in the offing this summer. The Federation have got a relatively new president, and there's talk that this summer he might look to bring in, as I say, a new president of the refereeing kind of committee, who's basically the refereeing boss in Spain, a new head of VAR in Spain. So some changes are, but in terms of broader changes like independent refereeing body and that kind of thing, that's a bit further off. And like I say, the question is, will it ever be enough to satisfy the critics? And also just the fact, as we've picked up on, that everyone always thinks that everyone else is better off, don't they? Like I say, the call here is, let's bring in English refs. And if you say that to a Premier League fan this season, it sounds ridiculous.
They want to bring in Spanish refs.
The Real Madrid get all the best players for the Premier League, so why are they going to try and get the best referees? What's the 1, 2, 3? Michael Oliver, you know, Anthony Taylor. Go. Have they got a top 3 the hit list that they want to take over to Spain? I
mean, it's a good question. I don't think Florentino Perez specified in that conversation with the Federation president which exact referees he'd want, and they might not know. So you could probably just fob him off with one who's not very good, but he's English.
They should take Dale. Dale Johnson should be their advisor on referee qualities and VAR. I think that would be the best sign.
He's going to be devastated. We've had a big long chat about referees. He's not been here. His ears will be burning in the office.
Dale is the Galactico of referees and VAR, so I think definitely put it into Florentino Perez.
That's all for this week. The show will be back next week with a women's football special ahead of the return of the NWSL in the US. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks looking ahead to Thomas Tuchel's first game as England manager. We'll see you then.